Hi everyone. It's super cool to look at the grid. I call it the Brady Bunch grid of everyone who's joined the this session. So I mean, if you have a second and understand the technology well enough, I invite you to just press on the gallery view button for a second, just to see. Right, you're surrounded by 83 other people who are all learning together today, and the most important aspect, I think, of convening this eFestival was we realized that suddenly our world is lacking for the ability for us to come together and just be together. So I care deeply about the fact that we're learning together today. I think that the topics and the presenters are quite remarkable. And I feel honored to be able to present among so many much more qualified presenters and teachers. But just to be joined with all of you in the closest thing we have to a room where we can be simultaneously much more than 6 feet away from each other and also very close is powerful. And I'm touched looking at the esteemed lot of people here, from colleagues to classmates to congregants, and just lots of other people who I look forward to learning Torah with. So thank you all again, and thank you, Tony. Many of you probably had a chance, hopefully, if you're a little more technologically adept, to download the PDF that I uploaded for our session. Don't worry if you did not have a chance to, because I am going to share my screen so you can follow along with the text we'll be studying. But we're studying today one of my favorite bits of Talmud, which I think really helps us have insight into the psyche of the rabbis, and gives us quite a deep moment to reflect on how we react to profound experiences. So if I can, I'm just going to ask a question, and I'm going to pause. I'm even going to turn off my video so all you see is a little logo, and don't look at me, but can actually think, right? But if you were presented with the most awesome, holy experience, how would you want to react? I'm going to ask that again. If you found yourself presented with the most awesome, holy experience before you, how would you hope of yourself to react? Take a minute, please, reflect on that, and then we'll come back and study together. Some of you may be familiar with the story of 4 rabbis who entered paradise. It comes to us from Tractate Chagiga of the Babylonian Talmud. It's, I think, a remarkable story. I think it's especially a remarkable story because my hunch is that the way that our tradition has often wanted us to study it leads us to an incorrect and unfair assumption of the rabbis themselves who participated in the experience. So our rabbis taught, Chagiga 14b, 4 entered paradise. They are Ben Akiva, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. 4 entered paradise. Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Take for a second and think, and perhaps you can write in the chat window as you have thoughts, so that we can enter into some form of discussion right now. What does it mean for 4 in the first place to enter paradise? What is the situation that the Talmud is already attempting to describe for us using its normally terse words? 4 entered paradise. The Hebrew word that's used for paradise, right, you may see if you're familiar with the Hebrew, right on the first line, is pardes. Now pardes, in addition to being the name of a remarkable institution, which we're proud to partner with right now, pardes means an orchard. What does it mean that 4 rabbis entered an orchard? Pardes is also an acronym that we use to describe 4 ways of studying Torah, right? There's 4 different understandings to any Torah text. Pardes can be an acronym, an understanding for that. I think what comes to mind for many of us, right, if we're talking, well, I see in the chat window, right, the four, right? Now, this is going to have great, great allusion and great connection to many other fours in our tradition, including many fours that are coming up in a week and a half. For children, for questions, etc. I think the orchard is immediately meant to help us see the possibility that we're talking about a very specific orchard, right? As David is writing, the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden. 4 rabbis enter the Garden of Eden, paradise. Now, what we assume is the first thing that one encounters when one comes there. What does one encounter when one enters the garden, when one enters paradise, when one enters this mystical space? Well, the likely assumption is, right, that the first thing one encounters there is the divine. Oh, and trees. Thank you. One enters the divine. One encounters the divine in the center of the garden when one enters paradise. Now, how do each of these 4 respond? Right, they all have very different reactions to encountering the divine, right? Ben Azai cast a look and died. Of him Torah teaches, precious in the sight of God is the death of saints, from Psalms 116. Right, so Ben Azai walks into the garden, casts a look on God, and dies. Interesting here that these 4 rabbis are all entering paradise, right? You might assume that what happened prior to this story commencing is that all 4 died. They died and therefore entered the world to come, Olam Haba, and then this is their reaction to encountering God. Well, no, at least says the text, right? What happens to Ben Azai? He casts a look and dies. Precious in the sight of God is the death of saints, right? So this, if you want more context, you have to refer to the important Torah portion taught to us by the most important midrash, I think, written at least in the 20th century, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Because if you remember from Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and this is super important to me because this is my bar mitzvah portion, Parshat Ki Tisa, and this is how I was taught it, right? At the very end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, what happens? Indiana Jones opens, or Indiana Jones and the woman with whom he is searching for the Ark, they encounter the Nazis who come upon the Ark of the Covenant, and what do? They open the Ark of the Covenant. And what happens to them? They die. But what does Indiana Jones do? He covers his eyes, covers the eyes of the woman. They both live. Why? Because he was a Torah scholar and learned in Parshat Ki Tisa. Maybe it was his bar mitzvah portion too, right? Moses asks to see God's presence, and God says, you can't see me. When you see me, you will die. So I will make my holiness pass before you, my presence pass before you, and God proclaims God's majesty and God's qualities, but Moses cannot actually see God, only God's back, as the Torah teaches, right? So Ben Azai seems to be fulfilling the dictum of this very parsha, of this piece of Torah of Indiana Jones, right? You can't see God and live, you see God and died. So in a sense, Ben Azai does exactly what is expected of him. There's too much to behold. Precious in the sight of God is the death of saints, but that's what happens. You see God, you die. That's what Ben Azai does. Back to the garden. Ben Zoma witnessed it and was harmed. That's an unfair translation on my part, because our tradition generally understands this text to be saying, actually, he went insane. Ben Zoma witnessed it and went insane. Of him, Torah teaches, have you found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient to you, yet lest you be filled and vomit it. Right? This is an experience which seemingly is too much for Ben Zoma. It's so overwhelming that Ben Zoma heitzitz v'nifga is the Hebrew. He went insane. It's too much. He can't take it in. The story seems to be implying that one of the losers here, as opposed to one of the winners, we'll get to the winners in a second, or one of the anti-heroes as opposed to the hero, is Ben Zoma. Right? What's wrong with him that he just went insane? But I would like to redeem him as we get a little further into this, but we're not there just yet. Acher cut down trees. Now I need to pause for a minute because we need to understand not just what this person did, that he cut down trees, which is within an orchard an incredibly destructive act. But we need to actually take a moment to understand his name. Acher, if you are a scholar of Hebrew, or not even a scholar, but just know some, you will know is one, not a normal name, but two, as Avril just pointed out, means other. So why is this guy who's come into the garden along with three other rabbis called other? If anyone's read As a Driven Leaf, you may have a, yeah, there, okay, Avril, you're prolific in your chat window usage here. But anyone who's read As a Driven Leaf knows a little bit more about Acher. Actually, Acher had a name, right? Acher's mother did not name Acher Acher. Acher's name is Elisha ben Abuya. But Elisha ben Abuya is an interesting fellow. Right? Elisha ben Abuya has a complicated history. And that is all wrapped up into this text calling him Acher, other. And that's all wrapped up into what the story is telling is his response to this experience. We're going to come back to him in a minute, but I want us to remember, right, that here's this third of the four people who entered this garden, who doesn't get a name, he just gets other, and his response is that he cuts down trees when he experiences the divine. Lastly, right, Rabbi Akiva left in peace. Rabbi Akiva yetza b'shalom. He came, he went in peace. Now, our tradition seems to teach us two things. One is it makes very clear through, I think, normative readings of this text that the hero of the story is Rabbi Akiva. He got it. He did it. Right. Other pieces of text go on to teach that it's from this moment that Akiva is leaving and going out and actually using it to teach Torah. Right. This is the moment that he's leveraging as his Torah, really to teach of the encounter with the divine, to connect people with our tradition. This is where he is inspired. This is the moment of his inspiration. Rabbi Akiva is the hero here. He's set up to be the winner. But my struggle immediately with this text is, if I just left an encounter with God like this and just left in peace, if that's what people said of me when I had an experience, an encounter like the four of these people did, that seems like a remarkably missed opportunity. It seems like I didn't quite do everything I could. It seems like it just passed me up. So that's my struggle here with Rabbi Akiva. Is he the hero of the story? Now, I don't want to say unequivocally he's not. There's pieces to him, and we're going to come back in a second to talk about him more. But I think actually each of the four of these gives us remarkable insight into possible reactions to a major experience like this. It's not that each one of them is right always. It's not that one of them is the only hero. It's actually, I think, each of them gives us the possibility, in the same way that a week and a half from now, each of the four children, while the quick read of the Haggadah is going to tell us for us to each try to be the wise child, opposed to a wise guy, right? There's actual remarkable truth in the experience of each of the four of them, and so too here. What is happening with each of our four participants in this encounter is itself an insightful opportunity for learning. So I want to start with Acher because I think he's the most interesting. Acher is a heretic. We can learn a little bit more about why he's called a heretic just by looking a little later in the text from that same page, or the next page of Talmud over, Chagiga 15b, continuing on in the source sheet. But what of Acher? Greek song did not cease from his mouth, as it is said of Acher, that when he used to get up from the Beit Midrash, many heretical books used to fall from his lap. Right? Acher is the kid who's sitting in shul on the high holidays, and in the machzor in front of him is actually a comic book placed on top of the text, or a magazine, or a newspaper. Rabbi Akiva, excuse me, that Acher was known for studying heretical books when he was sitting in the Beit Midrash. Greek song did not cease from his mouth. And therefore, the tradition sees him as a heretic, right? That's ultimately the crux of the story that happens is told in As a Driven Leaf, right? That Acher was all inspired by Greek philosophy. Therefore, he's a heretic. Therefore, we no longer call him by his Hebrew name, Elisha ben Abuya. We call him by another Hebrew name, which is an insulting non-Hebrew name, Acher, other. Therefore, he's not someone from whom we should learn or derive meaning. But I want to save him, right? Like, part of me really admires Acher, because it takes strength, I think, to be able to sit in a Beit Midrash and study Greek and study heretical books. Now, the heretical books are not heretical books; they're Greek philosophy, and plenty of other nice Jewish teachers studied Greek philosophy. You know, and among them, someone who many of us or most of us are probably familiar, a man by the name of Maimonides. Right? Maimonides' great thing is that he took Greek philosophy and made it Jewish. But Maimonides didn't lose his name. Well, half of the Jewish world didn't lose his name for him. His books were burned for a while and people didn't like him so much. But today we seemingly like him, right? We like Maimonides for the most part, by and large. I think. I don't want to assume for you, but if you nod that you like Maimonides, then I'll know you like Maimonides. If you don't, then, well, we can kick you out. But no, just kidding. We're not going to kick anyone out. The question is, what do we do with that, right? Like, what do we do with Acher's heresy? Because what seems to happen is he goes into this orchard and he cuts down trees, which I think the Talmud is attempting to show us is actually his ideas, his great heresy is actually destroying our tradition. It's destroying the encounter. But there's something also powerful about what he does. There's something powerful about the possibility of being, I think, a Jewish heretic. Right? One of the ways that I teach this text is just by focusing on Acher. Like, what does it mean to be a Jewish heretic? Right? And I love this quote from the non-Jewish Jew. It's the next text, right? The Jewish heretic who transcends Jewry belongs to a Jewish tradition. You may, if you like, view Acher as a prototype of those great revolutionaries of modern thought about whom I am going to speak this evening. You may do so if you necessarily wish to place them within any Jewish tradition, right? Ours is a tradition replete with good heretics, right? With whom we are sometimes very uncomfortable, right? Our tradition is always seemingly uncomfortable with the heretics in the current moment. But there are plenty of heretics of days past who, in retrospect, we think are actually not so heretical, right? If anyone wants to volunteer some examples, I'd love to read your comments. But we are not short of heretics who have done great services to our tradition through their heresy, right? So Anita writes, we need heretics to grow. You're so right? Like, my rabbinic thesis was all about that notion, right? That heresy ultimately is a challenge to the tradition, but without it, Judaism doesn't evolve and it becomes stagnant and actually a threat unto itself. And that any religious tradition, but Judaism in particular, has existed in a messy middle between being uncomfortable with and depending on heresy throughout time, right? Spinoza is another example. Mordechai Kaplan, another example. Thank you all for these comments. Maimonides, his books were burned around the world. But we need them. We need them. You know, I think one of the dangerous ways in which any religious tradition can exist is by saying that our tradition is right and your reason is wrong. And therefore, the tradition trumps the heretic by virtue of the tradition having the authority of itself. self-imposed. It's a little unfair to catch. It's a circular logic, that it ultimately writes people and their ideas out of our tradition, right? And for that, and that's in a way, I think, part of what Acher's struggle was. He didn't really have a way in which to articulate his challenges of the tradition without being written out by it and called another, right? But in a sense, right, and here's where this text, the next on our source sheet from Abraham Joshua Heschel, becomes important. It's Heschel's take on Saadia Gaon, one of the really the first major philosopher of the Middle Ages. And Heschel writes, right, Saadia Gaon takes the attitude that reason and revelation are not antagonistic to each other, but supplementary, so as to act in concert for a common goal. There is only one truth, but two ways to support it. Essentially, Heschel's analysis of Saadia Gaon is answering the very basic question: what happens when the Torah in front of me, the religious texts and ideas in front of me, seem to challenge the religious inklings of the Torah that I own, namely my head? Right? What do I do? Right? And Heschel here is saying that Saadia is saying that they are not antagonistic, reason and revelation, but they are actually mutually constructive, right? The best example of this comes to us from the example of the case of the wayward son that we're taught of in the Torah. There's the idea of this wayward son. What do we do with the wayward son, says the Torah? The same thing we do with a witch in Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail. I can see you all stone him. No? Okay. Everyone after this, we got our movie list. This is very important. You're going to go and watch Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. You're going to go and watch Monty Python and Search for the Holy Grail. Gamzu Torah. This will help in your understanding of these texts. And I know that you all have the time to watch videos, so I'll give you plenty more. But what do you do with a wayward child? You stone him. Now, the Talmud then deals with this notion of the wayward son and asks implicitly, the most important question is, what the heck do you mean we're going to stone a child? Because that is the most horrific thing ever, right? Right. I think we're all in agreement here. We don't stone kids. But the Torah seems to say pretty clearly, what do you do with this type of kid? You stone him. Well, that's a problem. So the Talmud, the rabbis of the Talmud do circles trying to understand, and ultimately they limit the scope of the notion of the wayward son, and they limit it and limit it and limit it further to so particularize the case in which this wayward son would apply, that ultimately, no, he doesn't get stoned, he is stoned. That ultimately, it seems as if it's never going to apply. They so restrict the legal case that it seems impossible. And so then ultimately the Talmud in this conversation about the wayward son concludes that there never is, was, or will be a wayward son. The very case described by the Torah of this wayward son, who we are going to stone to death, never happened and never will. In which case, the logical question to follow up with is, then why the heck does the Torah teach about a wayward child if there is never such a thing? And the answer the rabbis give is, I think, as insightful a piece of Talmud as there is. Right? The Torah teaches of this idea, which never is, was, or will be, in order to teach you the importance of studying Torah, right? Because if you, it's my extrapolation of what they're saying, if you read the Torah text talking about the wayward child that we stone to death and think, therefore, that there is such a thing as a child that we stone to death, you haven't studied your Torah seriously because you haven't let it jive with your reason. Right? Part of the redemption of the heretic, of Acher, in this story is that reason and revelation are mutually constructive, right? And so there is actually something good to being a heretic within the tradition. It is possible to be a good heretic. Now, Acher's actions were not good because he uses his heresy in this instance to perform a destructive act. Cutting down trees. Cutting down trees when you're in an orchard, that's about as destructive as it gets. Ultimately, he seems to be destroying from within. And that's the fear that the rabbis have in telling his story. So that's Acher. I want to now turn, if I may, to someone else in this story, really who the person I think is actually the hero. who gets lambasted and sidelined in the other direction, Ben Zoma. Ben Zoma went insane. It's not really, you're not winning an Academy Award for your performance in a story in which you as a character go insane, rather than someone like Akiva who goes off in peace. But I think there's something powerful about Ben Zoma's experience, right? It says that Ben Zoma hitzitz v'nifga, or he was harmed in a sense by this experience. But I also want to say, if I can be liberal in my understanding, it's also that he was touched by it, and that's important, because who in their right mind could experience fully an encounter in which they enter the Garden of Eden and witness the divine and weren't seriously touched by that encounter? All right, for that, I want to actually turn to another story. No Hollywood now, just Hasidic storytelling. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav tells the story of the Turkey Prince. It's my favorite Hasidic tale. So everyone just cuddle up, get a blanket. If you have some cookies and milk, I'm going to tell you a story for a second. Right? Once the king's son went mad. He thought he was a turkey. He felt compelled to sit under the table without any clothes on, pulling at bits of bread and bones like a turkey. None of the doctors could do anything to help him or cure him, and they gave up in despair. The king was very sad, until a wise man came and said, "I can cure him." What did the wise man do? He took off all his clothes and sat down naked under the table next to the king's son, and also pulled at crumbs and bones. The prince asked him, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" "And what are you doing here?" he replied. "I am a turkey," said the prince. "Well, I'm also a turkey," said the wise man. The two of them sat there together like this for some time until they were used to one another. And then the wise man gave a sign and they threw him shirts. The wise man turkey said to the king's son, "Do you think a turkey can't wear a shirt? You can wear a shirt and still be a turkey." The two of them put on shirts. After a while, he gave another sign and they threw them some trousers. The wise man said, "Do you think if you wear trousers, you can't be a turkey?" They put on the trousers. One by one, they put on the rest of their clothes in the same way. Afterward, the wise man gave a sign and they put down human food from the table. The wise man said to the prince, "Do you think if you eat good food, you can't be a turkey anymore? Excuse me. You can eat this food and still be a turkey." They ate. Then he said to him, "Do you think a turkey has to sit under the table? You can be a turkey and sit up at the table." This was how the wise man dealt with the prince, until in the end, he cured him completely. I think this is a profound story about what it means to encounter another person and to empathize with their reality and honor them for who they are. Right? And the most profound moment in this story is when the wise man turkey is given that name, the wise man turkey. Right? That what happened ultimately, that the king was unable to cure his son, is because all these people tried to come and tell the turkey prince to stop being a turkey. Stop being you. And ultimately, it's the wise man who cures, and I want to come back to that word in a second, who cures the turkey prince by telling him, "Actually, turkey prince, you are a turkey. You can be a turkey. Come out from under the table and be you." Right? Be here. Just do it as you are. Right? In essence, then, like that word at the very end, right, of the turkey prince being cured, he never was cured because there was no cure to be had. He was empowered to be him. Right? Now, if we take that story and graft it onto our experience with Ben Zoma in the garden, right? What if Ben Zoma was just really touched, and the way that the tradition is referring to him in this story as having gone insane is really no different than what the king's men who are trying to cure the turkey prince, the doctors, or it's the same thing the doctors were doing to the turkey prince, trying to cure him and saying you can't do that, you can't be that. What happened with Ben Zoma is Ben Zoma was touched by a profound experience. It affected him to his core. And now the challenge for him is, what can he do? Can he do something with it? Is he able to transcend? Is he able to transcend? Anita, I love the way that you are talking at us, and I see you are engaging with text, and this is lovely. I can't hear a word you're saying, but I love it. Thank you. Right. Ben Zoma, can Ben Zoma transcend that experience and take how much he is touched by it and then do something with it? That's what I think it means to have a serious encounter with something. And bring it out into the world, right? Can we straddle the difference, the distinction between Ben Zoma and Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, goes out in peace. And frankly, if you encounter God in the garden and live through the whole experience and don't go insane and don't start cutting down trees and you just go out of that in peace, well, shame on you. You've missed something, I think. Right, in that sense, each of us in our own little Zoom Brady Bunch square windows, as we live through this unprecedented moment in human history, where we are more connected than ever before and forcibly disconnected in order to save either ourselves or our loved ones or people we don't know from harm. How will we straddle between being Ben Zoma and Rabbi Akiva in this situation? Can we be impacted such that we can learn from and grow from this experience, while also not just being like Rabbi Akiva, who I fear, if he were here 6 months from now, he'd just be ready to go along his merry way. And I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's good enough. I want to read one little extra piece just because it's my favorite thing that ever any human being has written. And the fact that he wrote it on the first page of his book, well, it makes reading the book easy because I could stop about 2 paragraphs in. It's a very complicated book. God in Search of Man, a fantastic read. I recommend it. You got plenty of time on your hands. Why don't you all read? Everyone go read God in Search of Man while we're doing this pandemic thing. Abraham Joshua Heschel. All right, so Heschel writes, it is customary to blame secular science and anti-religious philosophy for the eclipse of religion in modern society. It would be more honest to blame religion for its own defeats. Religion declined not because it was refuted, but because it became irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid. Who the heck else is able to use the word insipid on the first page of their book? I mean, really, like, thank you, Heschel. But that for me is the crux ultimately of what I care about doing for our tradition, for our people, for our community. What I think this story of 4 who entered paradise can give us perspective to do, right? How might we not allow tradition to become irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid? How might we animate it? I think we can do that by learning from the experience of each of these 4. And then taking that into the way that we build community, the way that we come together like right now, right? That is the vision for me that really inspires and animates my work with Limmud. Like, what an incredible movement and organization that we get to continually bring people together who don't know how to come together, either because we live in different communities, we exist in different ecosystems, we disagree, or we have forgotten how to talk. Well, I think that's important. I think that's the remedy that our tradition needs, whether it knows it or not. And I think all the more so at this time of social distancing, we need more opportunities for social connecting through distance. And so I invite us all to be inspired by the examples of each of these 4 rabbis, each of these 4 encounters with holiness, and use a little bit of each of them to inspire our own search for divinity and our own search for community and our own search for connecting. Right now, but all the more so through the rest of our lives, because we will not live under threat of pandemic forever. And so at some point we've got to go out and get back to normal. But normal ain't good enough. Normal ain't good enough. We've got to learn from this and be moved by this, right? We can't be cured from this. We can be cured from a disease, but our social disconnecting is something that happened long before a pandemic forced it upon us. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to be done with my soapbox. You know, it's funny, if you're all muted, then I just have to keep talking. But I would love to open up for questions, and I would love to be challenged and hear your thoughts and hear how you disagree or agree. So Tony, maybe we can invite people to raise their hands, and then we'll have a little dialogue. We got a few minutes, right?
How about if we have 8 minutes left. We would love to have your questions. Please go ahead and use the chat box. For some reason, my version of Zoom, I can't see the hand raises. So if you can go ahead and go to the chat box with your question, and we will bring that into the conversation. So
I can see hand raises, actually.
What was that, David?
I can see hand raises.
All right.
And, if it's all right, I'm just going to call on people then. Can I? All right. Thanks, Tony. All right. Carl, I'm just going to give you a warning. I'm about to unmute you, but your hand is raised. Here you go.
Hi, I'll be so bold as to suggest some parallel here with the destruction of the temple and a radical change in how Jewish practice had to be done and new things to come after. And as you suggest, maybe some of the changes we're now doing, streaming services and other stuff, need to persist after the virus is under control, God willing.
Yeah, God willing. Actually, I would encourage you, if you're interested in what Paul just said, to participate the next hour, to attend the session From Plague to Promised Land, being taught by none other than Tony, who's actually going to, I think, really be talking about this very idea, Carl, of where do we go from here, and how do we leverage our technologies and our learnings to become more socially connected as a community. So thank you, Carl. I appreciate it. Do we have other questions? I don't see any more hands. Oh, I see a real hand. Let's see. That's Anita. So now I need to find her. Here you go, Anita.
Hi. I'll just yeah. Thank you. Hi, David.
Hi.
So this also reminded me of this concept, the mystical concept of Tzimtzum. When you contract and you retreat into your own little, space, like we are all doing, right? That makes room for other things. And a lot of times, I think when we were out there living in our worlds and filling our lives, I mean, I personally have 3 extra hours a day where I'm not commuting. This is a good thing. I think that sometimes we have to contract into ourselves for a little bit. It may not feel good, but it leaves room for other things to grow, other things to develop. And I think that's another impact that we will all be changed after this, is that we found ways to find room in our lives and our social connections for other things, because we've been contracted and made small for a little while.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks, Anita. Other thoughts, reactions? Well, yes, I see. Oh, there's a hand. Faye.
Thank you, David. This is one of my favorite texts. And I think that as we all begin to take ourselves and to realize that we are transformed, regardless of whether we chose to be or not, we are all being transformed at this time. We go out into the world again in some way, whether we go digitally or we go, into the real world. We're going to have to deal with that transformation and with each other's transformations. So I think we need to learn from each of the rabbis that we should not be so overwhelmed that we die, that we should be able to look at things analytically like Acher did, and we should be able to understand the transformation and accept each other and still leave the Pardes.
Yes, amen. I mean, isn't it interesting? Like the text starts with each of them entering 4 entered paradise. Arba nichnasu lefardes. Right? It doesn't say whether they chose to. It doesn't say how they got there. It doesn't say whether this was thrust upon them or they were seeking it out. It doesn't matter, frankly. It's the experience that they've got, and then the question is, what do they do with it? Right? How do they turn that experience into a blessing? How do they turn that experience into something transformative, or do they, or might they? Well, I just want to thank you all. It's been a pleasure learning with you, seeing your faces and your nods and smiles and all other body languages that you're communicating, either with little call symbols in the corner of your screen or with your actual faces. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you, Tony, for moderating us so adeptly.
Thank you, David. And thank you, everyone, for being part of our virtual community today. We are so glad to have had you here. The discussion in the chat box was just incredible. You were really part of creating something special here today. And please enjoy the rest of the festival.